Welcome back. A Fox News alert. North Korea ramping up the high-octane rhetoric today, saying that it is in a state of war with South Korea. And this following North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un's latest threats to strike the U.S. mainland, warning that he is preparing to, quote, settle accounts with the U.S. This, of course, after the U.S. deployed B-2 stealth bombers to South Korea. How serious are these threats, or are they just a bluster? Mark Dubowitz, he is the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, and he joins us now with some more insight. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
So how serious should we take these threats from North Korea?
Well, Heather, the rhetoric has been the same for decades from this Kim and from his father and grandfather. I think we need to focus not on the rhetoric, but on the technology. North Korea is moving forward very aggressively with their advanced ballistic missile technology. They've tested 3 nuclear weapons. This is a serious proliferation threat to the region and to the world.
And on that note, I do want to take a look at this picture that was released by North Korean state media. So we do need to say that. And it was of Kim and his senior generals huddled in front, you can see there, of a map alleging that this would be, their envisioned strikes against cities on both American coasts. They titled the map U.S. Mainland Strike Plan. How realistic is that, and what do we know about what they have in their arsenal right now?
Well, we know that they can't yet hit the continental United States with a nuclear-tipped missile, but we've always been surprised by the pace of North Korea's ballistic missile development and their nuclear development. I mean, they went nuclear without us detecting it. So we've got to be prepared for an unforeseen circumstance where North Korea could one day hit the continental United States with a nuclear-tipped missile, or transfer that technology to Iran, for example.
And they have armed forces, approximately 1.3 million active personnel. You mentioned that they went nuclear without us knowing. So how do we, in fact, know what they have or do not have?
That's the problem, and this is the hermit kingdom. We don't have a lot of insight into what North Korea is doing from a nuclear or from a ballistic missile point of view. We've been surprised time and time again. China went nuclear, the Soviet Union, Pakistan, India, North Korea, and perhaps Iran. We've been surprised time and time again. Our intelligence services have got it wrong.
So let's move beyond North Korea and talk about what you think is a lesson that we need to take from the situation going on right now. You mentioned Iran, but first I want to talk about North Korea and their ties to Syria.
Correct. Well, we know in 2007 that the North Koreans actually sold a nuclear reactor to North Korea, and Syria would have nuclear weapons today if Israel hadn't decided in 2007 actually to strike that nuclear reactor before it went active. So this is it's a terrible situation. We could be facing a Syria today where you have a fight between Iran and Hezbollah on one hand, Al-Qaeda on the other hand, and they could be fighting over these nuclear weapons. So North Korea's proliferation is a serious concern, and that, I think, is something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention.
And North Korea and Iran specifically?
There's an extensive cooperation going on between North Korea and Iran today. We know that a senior architect of Iran's nuclear program was just recently in North Korea witnessing a North Korean nuclear test. There's extensive cooperation. They've been cooperating for years on advanced ballistic missiles. So we've got to focus on North Korea's technology, because that technology is going to end up in Iranian hands one day.
And you mentioned the nuclear test. There was the one on February 12th, I believe, and that resulted in additional UN sanctions. Could this all be a move by Kim Jong-un to perhaps draw Washington and the United States into maybe additional aid for North Korea?
Well, that certainly has been his M.O. and the M.O. of his father and grandfather. I mean, the problem with North Korea is they threaten us when we sanction them. They threaten us when we lift sanctions. When we try to engage in these 5-party talks to come to some kind of compromise, they threaten us. And it's a constant game of threats and ratcheting up the pressure. This is a rogue regime that understands when you have nuclear weapons, it's a whole different game, and Iran is watching.
So who has the greatest chance of, negotiating with them or saying, hey, let's back down with the threats?
Well, for years, we've really tried to get the Chinese engaged in this, and we've thought that the Chinese were very concerned about a nuclear North Korea. The reality is that the Chinese are much more concerned about the implosion of a North Korean regime and having tens of millions of starving North Korean refugees flooding over their borders. They're also concerned in Beijing about a unified Korea, the Korean Peninsula, a democratic Korea that's pro-Western, pro-American.
Which
so
is
the Chinese,
what our stated goal has been.
Well, that's exactly right, and the Chinese certainly do not want that. So while they may not like North Korea and its bellicose behavior, their greatest fear from a national security point of view is a unified democratic Korea.
Okay, what about the possibility of, a localized conflict escalating?
Well, there's always a chance of that. I mean, these provocations can obviously lead to miscalculation at any time, and you could see an exchange over the Korean Peninsula. I would think that at this point we are trying to contain this. We're trying to ratchet down the pressure. We sent the B-2 bombers to send a clear message to Kim that we're serious about protecting South Korea and our Asian allies. So I think the risks of a full-scale military escalation are low right now. I think the greatest risk right now is really in the Middle East. It's the lessons Iran is drawing from North Korea. And the fact is that Iran today is 15 months away from achieving an undetectable nuclear weapon.
And they are watching to see how we respond to this. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate that insight and some additional thoughts on it that we hadn't heard so far.
Thanks, Heather.